All right, welcome. We're going to talk about Charlie Coyle today. Got my Minnesota Wild hat on. It's where Charlie Coyle spent the first half of his career. Second half in Boston, where he currently is. This was a player in Minnesota when he was first coming up. There was a lot of hype around him. So he was originally drafted by the Sharks. I don't remember, nor did I look up the trade that got Charlie Coyle as a prospect to Minnesota. Nonetheless, he was drafted in 2010. He was a first-round pick, but he was also the 28th pick. So sometimes the later first-round picks can be very hit or miss. As he progressed, he did a couple seasons at BU. He had a season at the QJ, whatever it's called, the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. There you go. Excuse me. He was successful at all levels. He wasn't putting up elite numbers really anywhere after major juniors in Quebec. BU, I mean, he had good numbers at BU. He was a good two-way centerman at Boston University, but he wasn't putting up point-per-game numbers. He wasn't exceeding expectations. For a first overall pick, you kind of want that player to be around a point per game in college at a minimum, and that's kind of where he was at. So there's a little skepticism about his offensive upside after he was drafted and after the Wild acquired him as a prospect. But nonetheless, there was a lot of raw talent they could work with at the time, right? So the expectations and the scouting reports, and this is mostly, the critiques, I guess, which is why he didn't necessarily work out in Minnesota. It's because he didn't necessarily fit the mold they wanted in a hockey player. He wasn't the player they were hoping to get. And that's not to say he's a bad player or was disappointing. He was a very good player. It wasn't the right player for the right team at the right time. So his expectations, he was projected to be a top 6 two-way forward. He was projected to be a power forward, more along the lines of think of like David Backes, right? Gets into the gritty areas, throws some hits, can get a little physical. Very good defensive forward. The projections where he'd be a good face-off man. And he's been a pretty good face-off man. I wouldn't say he's been elite, but you'll see as we go through the stats, he progresses every year, so there's positives there. One of the biggest critiques that Charlie Coyle had, not just before the NHL, but also his entire time with the Minnesota Wild, was he needs to use his big frame more. The dude is 6'3", 218 pounds. Like, he's a big guy. I've seen listings at 6'4", which is, that's my height. I'm taller than pretty much everybody I walk by. Like, I see overheads. This dude is comparable in size, right? And he's got some muscle. 218, that's a lot of muscle right there. He's a strong guy. So a lot of the critiques were he needs to use his frame more. He needs to get into those dirtier areas more. He's very skilled with the puck, but he needs, there's another level to his game that has been unrealized yet, and that can put him to a point where he can be a 30-plus goal scorer. David Backes was a 30-goal scorer just by getting into the paint and getting those dirty goals, right? Backes had an okay shot. He definitely had moments where his shot, like he would pick a corner, but at the same time, most of his goals came in off of rebounds and in the blue paint, essentially. So the last biggest complaint, I guess, or critique of Charlie Coyle was he needs to get into the dirty areas. That is something we don't necessarily see of Charlie Coyle, but it has evolved a little bit since being in Boston. He acts more now as a power forward than he did in Minnesota. He's worked on his face-offs seemingly every single year. He doesn't tend to get too many dirty goals, comparatively speaking, to other guys throughout the league that rely on those dirty goals. But let's dive into it. His rookie year, he was 17th in the Calder voting out of 19. Probably because he only played 37 games, but he was pretty good in those 37 games. 8 goals, 6 assists, 14 points, about 15 minutes of time on ice, and his faceoff percentage was 34.6%. Rookies in the faceoff dot are usually not very good, so take that with a grain of salt. It usually takes a few years to kind of get up to NHL standards in the faceoff circle. Second year, which is his first full year as a Minnesota Wild player, starts on the third line, gets promoted to the second line, moves back down to the third line. 70 games, 12 goals, 18 assists, 30 points. He was a -7, 17 .05 time on ice. His faceoff percentage was a 41.9. Again, they're really hoping for him to be a second-line center. He's not quite being the power forward that they were hoping. Charlie Coyle, more of a shooter. And the Wild are trying to mold this player really into a gritty power forward two-way face-off guy that can get into those dirty areas, get those rebound goals in front of the net, and push a few guys aside. Didn't happen. 2014-2015, this is where we really start to see the evolution of Charlie Coyle trying to embrace the power forward mentality. And it didn't work. It just didn't work. That's not the type of player he is, and you know what? That's okay, because he's still an NHL player and very good. He's a talented player. Full season, 82 games, 11 goals, 24 assists, 35 points. He was a plus 13, 14.33 average time on ice. His face-offs, yet again, increased 46.3%. He played on the third and fourth line that year. The first two full seasons for Charlie Coyle, he also spent some time on, I forget which wing it was, but he spent some time as a winger. He was playing third line wing at some point. He was playing fourth line center. He played a couple games as fourth line wing, but predominantly he was utilized as a center. Good centerman. Good defensively throughout his entire career, including back into his rookie days. Not elite, never got any Selke votes in his entire career, but nonetheless, he's still a very, very good 200-foot player and very responsible in his own defensive zone. Useful on the penalty kill, useful on the power play to an extent. He didn't really have a lot of power play success in Minnesota. He's finding a little bit in Boston, but let's keep expectations reserved. He was tried on the penalty kill several different seasons in Minnesota and was kicked off pretty frequently. Like he just wasn't the right fit. So getting into the next season, I don't even know where we are. 2015-2016, so his third full season. It's his first and his only 20-goal campaign of his entire career. 21 goals, 21 assists, 42 points. He was a +1. 17-18 was his time on ice. 45.4% in the face-off dot. Spent most of the season as the second-line center for the Minnesota Wild. They figured you put him in a better position to succeed, he'll start to grow into that role and succeed. Didn't happen, got bumped back down to that third line. Face-off percentage takes a dip, primarily because he's playing on that second line, playing against better face-off guys. But you're talking about a 1.1% dip in percentage. That's really not bad. That kind of tells you that he's worked on his face-off game and it's improving. It's not elite status just yet, but it's getting better. That's what it tells me anyway. That's obviously open to interpretation. Moving on, where are we? Right here. 2016-2017, 82 games, 18 goals, which is his second most in his career. Oh, I lied. Oh, yeah, his second most in his career. 38 assists, his most in his career. 56 points, his most in his career, and he was a +13, which is tied for the second most in his career with just a couple seasons ago. 16.42 average time on ice, 46% of the face-off dot. Spent some time as the second-line center in the middle of the season, but to start the season, to end the season, he was a third-line center. 46% face-off dot. So we're holding about steady. Next season, this is his career year offensively anyway, and you can make a case for defensive play. He kind of found that next level, but I don't know. Pretty steady growth year in and year out. He's not going to come in and shock you with amazing growth. There's going to be incremental growth every single year, and we've seen it in Minnesota. We've seen it in Boston. He gets a little better every single year. He's not growing drastically. He's not regressing. But he's not blowing anyone out of the water with his growth. So I don't even know where we're at. I think it's 2017-2018, 66 games, 11 goals, 26 assists, 37 points. He's a +8, 16.31 average time on ice, 52.2% in the face-off dot. His first in one of only 2 years above 50% in the face-off dot. He spent the entire season as a third-line center in Minnesota. He at this point it was realized he's a third-line center. You'll be happy to get 40 points out of him. maybe 45 on a good year. It was a lot of the media in Minnesota was realizing that 56-point campaign was probably a career year for him, and nobody was sure he would ever be able to replicate that again. We're going on to his final season in Minnesota. He played 60 games where he was dealt at the trade deadline. He was traded to Boston in exchange for Ryan Donato, who, yes, did play in Minnesota briefly, and it was a disaster, and a fifth-round pick. The Wild at this point were looking to get anything they could out of Charlie Coyle. His contract was expiring. They needed to get something for him instead of nothing because they had no. The words from the media at the time were they did not see upper management in Minnesota did not see Charlie Coyle as a part of their immediate future. Keep in mind this is around the time, I think it's just before Bill Guerin comes in. Just before the Parise Suter buyouts, right? Coyle's shipped off. Okay. And it kind of made sense, the direction the team was going in, the amount of money Coyle would command because of the roles he had on the team. He was playing somewhat on the power play. He was a big penalty kill guy. He was a big defensive forward. He's going to command more money than the Wild were willing to pay anyway. So they traded him. Off to Boston, they got pretty much nothing for him. I don't remember what that fifth-round pick turned into. It could have been something, but I don't think the Wild have any drafted fifth-round pick players on their roster. They could have traded it, but I don't know, man. Anyway, so in that season, his last almost full season in Minnesota, 60 games, 10 goals, 18 assists, 28 points. He was a +1, 1703 average time on ice, 46% in the face-off dot. We saw him as a second-line center, I don't know, for a handful of games. And I think that's because, oh, God, test of my knowledge, Mikko Koivu had an injury, and he wasn't the second-line center for the entire duration of that injury. I think it was Mikko Koivu. Not 100%. Didn't look it up, but pretty sure there was an injury here. And Coyle spent some time on that second line and had to drop back down to that third line because it was not working. I think he was only on that second line for maybe like 5 games or so. Like, it wasn't a lot, so I didn't include it. Pretty much third line center. All of his stats were kind of down across the board. They knew he was on his way out. He knew he was on his way out. Under a half point per game. You're getting questionable play from him throughout this year. It wasn't bad play, but there were games where you could definitely question the effort he was putting in, and there was a lot of that from the media. Really throughout his entire career in Minnesota, questioning his effort level was always there with the media. And it's understandable. In Minnesota, he looked like he would have lazier shifts, but nonetheless, it's one of those open to interpretation things. Some players just give off that persona like they're taking an easier shift this round, and in reality, they're really not. Because if you're actually if you look at them and follow them, like they're doing a lot of things that you may not be noticing. They're skating a pretty significant distance, and they might be tired at the end of their shift and leave kind of a bad taste in your mouth. So I don't know how many shifts he necessarily took off. This last season is kind of the exception to the rule. He definitely took shifts off. He took games off. It was just one of those bad relationship things at that time. And it wasn't even a bad relationship. It was just these two parties were clearly parting ways and were done with each other. So he shipped off at the trade deadline. Boston, he kind of continues his bad season. He just had a rough season this year. 21 games with Boston, 2 goals, 4 assists, 6 points. He was a -2, 15.58 average time on ice, 45.5 in the faceoff dot. And he was a third-line center. He's behind Bergeron and Krejci. And intermittently throughout his time with Boston, he spent time on that first line under Bruce Cassidy and somewhat on that second line through injuries. And it hasn't worked out too well, just in my opinion. But I think the exposure and faith in him later on in his career definitely reinvigorated him in some way, shape, or form. All right, first full season in Boston, 70 games, 16 assists, 70 games, 16 goals, 21 assists, 37 points. He's a +9, 16.47 average time on ice, 46.6 in the faceoff dot, third line center. So you're getting around a 45 to 47% face-off guy as a third-line center. First full season playing behind Krejci and Bergeron, both very good face-off men in their own right, and he starts to learn from that. 2021, 51 games played, 6 goals, 10 assists for 16 points. This was the year after he signed that five-year, $5.25 million contract with the Bruins, because the year prior he had a crazy almost point-per-game playoff run. And we'll talk about that at the end, right? So he was a -4 the year after he signs that contract, and there's a lot of people coming out being like, this is probably the worst contract in the NHL. And for this year, they really weren't wrong. He wasn't very good. But his face-off percentage increases, 48.3%. That's his second highest of his career. You only have one other 50.2% where he spent on the third line. Spent the year as a third-line center. 21-22 season, 82 games, 16 goals, 28 assists, 44 points. He's a -6. This is kind of the bounce back of Charlie Coyle from his couple down seasons, I guess. Intermittently couple down seasons. I don't know. Because the 2019-2020 season was about right. He's slightly over or around a half point per game. 17-24 average time on ice. This is where we saw Bruce Cassidy put Charlie Coyle on that first line often, and it didn't work, but he was there. 49.1% in the face-off dot, so we're seeing increases pretty significantly. Just kidding. This was actually... okay. The year before is when Bruce Cassidy really put Coyle on that first line, get him some exposure. 21-22 is the year without Krejci and Bergeron. So Coyle started the season, spent about half the season as the second-line center, and ultimately lost the job to Eric Haula. Coyle wasn't putting up exceptional stats. He was around like 45% in the face-off dot. He was okay, but he was definitely a third-line center, and it was really starting to show. So halfway through the season, gets moved down to third-line center, goes off on the face-off dot. Like he finished the season with like 56, 57% on the face-off dot, which brought him to that 49.1%. His plus or his -6, I don't really remember what that stat was. I'm not gonna lie, but about a point or a half point per game, which is consistent. It doesn't matter what line you put him on; he's probably going to produce at a similar rate. But nonetheless, goes off as a third-line center face-off man. That's a positive step. Last year, the historic year for the Bruins in the regular season, 82 games played, 16 goals, 29 assists, 45 points. Again, very consistent with his offensive stats, plus 29. The whole team was a positive in the plus-minus, and pretty significantly because of the historic season. 16:59 average time on ice, so 17 minutes. 52.5% in the face-off dot as the third-line center. That is a career year in the face-off dot. Yes, he's playing a third-line center. Yes, Bergeron and Krejci are back, but he's getting more difficult face-offs. He's going on the penalty. He's on the penalty kill, taking face-offs against some of the more elite guys. He's on the penalty kill with Bergeron at times. Bergeron, one of the best face-off guys in the history of the game, may get kicked off the face-off. You have Charlie Coyle stepping in, taking face-offs against guys like John Tavares and Austin Matthews and some of the better face-off guys in the league. So it's nothing to sneeze at. That 52.5% is fantastic. This year, 33 games played, 12 goals, 11 assists, 23 points. He's scoring well above his average point per game rate. He's a plus-minus of 0. 16:38 average time on ice. Face-off dot, 48.3%. He's played on the second and third line, and I don't really know what's going on with the Bruins lines this year. You're seeing him play sometime on the first line earlier in the season. I don't even want to say earlier, maybe like 10 games ago. You're seeing him on the third line. You're seeing the third line become the second line in the middle of the game, and I think that's a shout-out to the Bruins coach, Jim Montgomery, for his utilization of those lines. Nonetheless, that 48.3% is pretty misleading in my opinion. It A lot of the faceoffs he's taken this year they've been impressive wins. He's taken a lot of important faceoffs against a lot of good faceoff guys this year. If he's back down to a third line role, I think you're talking about 54, 55% on the faceoff dot. Every single year, pretty much is an incremental improvement in the faceoff dot, and I think that speaks volumes to Charlie Coyle. Charlie Coyle, big, skilled guy, tough to push him off the puck. There have been questions, at least from myself, in terms of the chemistry he has with certain players on his line. Good locker room guy, good leader, great human being as far as I can tell. Good family. I'm friends with his cousin, which is weird. I haven't spoken to her quite some time, but nonetheless, right? It's a great family, and it's just there's a lot of positives. There's not a whole lot of negatives to talk about when it comes to Charlie Coyle, but you have to keep your expectations in check. He is a third line center. He's really nothing more, but really nothing less. He doesn't belong on a fourth line. It's very questionable when you put him on a second line, and it's been tried a lot throughout his career, and that's okay. Honestly, like, to be a third line center at an NHL level and be consistently good and be one of the better two-way centers in the game throughout over a decade is impressive nonetheless. And the fact that he is, I don't even know how old he is, 30 something, 31. He's 31 and still continues to improve his game year in and year out. Again, offensive production is about the same. It's pretty consistent in terms of points per game. Pretty consistent. You're going to get between 15 and 20 goals ish, roughly. This year, again, I'm going to say it again, kind of the exception to the rule. He's shooting at a 19%, which is absurd. His career average is 11.1%, including this past year. So again, I think we see Charlie Coyle's numbers dip a little bit. I also think the players he's playing around are more attuned to playing with him, and the chemistry has grown a bit, right? Coyle and Trent Frederick, when they play together, they look great. DeBrusk, when he plays with Charlie Coyle, has never looked great. It's one of those things. DeBrusk and Coyle really should not be on the same line together. It's not like they appear to really like each other and they work on it, but it's two very conflicting styles. Coyle is a skilled guy. He likes to hang on to the puck. He likes to power move. He'll deke in front to the net sometimes, but he's not going to stand in the net. He's not going to cross-check the D-man. He's not going to fight for rebounds typically. That's not the type of player you'll see Charlie Coyle be. He's got a great shot. He's pretty good in the shootout. But it's a two-way play. He's very good defensively. There's something else I was going to talk about, and I totally forgot. It was somewhere in this area. Yeah, I'm not remembering. Oh, his contract. All right, where are we going with his contract? So, 2019, or maybe it was the 2018-2019 season. I don't know. It might have been this season. That would make sense. I guess I could look it up. Yeah, 2018-2019. That was the season. The Bruins went to the Stanley Cup Finals against the St. Louis Blues and lost. But Charlie Coyle, ridiculous postseason numbers. Very, very out of the ordinary for his entirety of his playoff career. It was a very unusual playoff season for Charlie Coyle. Got him the contract, 5 years, $5.25 million. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know. Anyway, you get a guy that's about a half point per game. You get a guy that looks a little comfortable. Not great stats offensively or defensively. Third line center, you're giving over $5 million to. The past couple seasons, it started to be a better contract, especially as we see the salary cap increase, which was kind of expected. It was the contract, while it wasn't great at the time, was going to age a little better. And there were going to be other bad contracts that kind of make this one a bit diluted. Right, this year especially, his contract looks like a bargain, which is not something I would have said a couple years ago. Plus minus, His offensive numbers are probably higher than where they will be, but his ability to jump up and down the lineup and play with different players, and play a 200-foot game and take those important face-offs when you're down both Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci, who are both very good face-off guys, is really key for this team. A team that needs to win games defensively. The offensive firepower for this team, the Bruins, it's really just not there. It's not elite. They're going to win some gritty, close, tight, low-scoring games, and that's how they're going to have to win. And Charlie Coyle is a pretty key piece with that, not only because he's consistent offensively, but he's a very good defensive forward. He leads by example when it comes to defense. So ultimately, I do think the contract in its entirety, probably not the most ideal contract, probably a little overpaid. He's the hometown kid. He's got some leadership qualities. He's a 200-foot forward. He scores at about a half point per game. Like, you can kind of make that justification. I get it. But, you can also look at a recent contract that was signed in Minnesota in Marcus Foligno. Obviously, different players. Marcus Foligno throws the body around a lot more than Coyle. They're both big power forwards, per se. Charlie Coyle, you can call him a two-way forward instead, like whatever makes you happy. Both are very good defensively. Marcus Foligno, I don't know if I said this, 4 years, $4 million per year. Coyle, 5.25 annual average value. Marcus Foligno is consistently in the Selke talk. He's not going to win the Selke. He's not going to be a Selke finalist, but he's in the Selke talk and gets Selke votes pretty regularly. Charlie Coyle has never gotten a Selke vote. Okay, so Foligno as a winger, which is more rare than a center to get votes, is recognized for his fantastic defense play. To this point, Charlie Coyle, not so much. We may see that change this year. I don't know. He's good. Charlie Coyle is good defensively, but he's not elite. And there are a lot of good elite forwards that play incredible elite defense in the league. Charlie Coyle, I'd say, is above average. He's a centerman. He knows his role. He does it well, and a lot of the little things he does definitely go unnoticed. But in terms of the offense related to Marcus Foligno and Charlie Coyle, Marcus Foligno, about a half point per game. A couple seasons ago, he was a little over a half point per game. Can be pretty comparable in terms of stats. Foligno's a little better defensively. Foligno doesn't have to take draws, but is, I'd say, in much more of a leadership role currently than Charlie Coyle is currently. So at the end of the day, that's just one comparable. There's a ton of comparables, and there's a ton of bad contracts currently in the NHL. You can compare on the other hand too. I think Marcus Foligno's contract is not a great contract. He's definitely having a good year, but can he keep this up? That's the question. Whereas we know with Charlie Coyle, he can keep this up. I keep saying it. He's one of the more consistent players I've ever seen in terms of stats and really play. He's very consistent game in, game out. What you see and what you expect. So I have a lot of respect for him. I think that's extremely difficult to do, and it speaks volumes about his conditioning and what he works on in the offseason and during practices. At this point, this year, I think the contract is fine. I think it's adequate. I think when it expires, we probably see a pay raise, knowing Don Sweeney and what he likes to do for not just hometown kids, not just, he just loves throwing money at restricted free agent, or not restricted. He just loves throwing money at players that can be questionable at times. Charlie Coyle, if he stays with the Bruins, I'm projecting he gets around 6.25 to 6.5 million. And I assume he will stay with the Bruins, and I assume it will be a contract that has some term and probably a no movement or a trade clause. I gotta look. This video is just about 30 minutes long, so okay. All right, there we go. We got some contract info. It was after the 2019-2020 season. I don't know why I thought the Blues. I don't know. So his first year after getting that contract was a bad year. After this year, there's 2 more years left on his contract. It was 6 years, not 5 years. So my apologies. Doing some of this from memories. still 5.25 million. Yeah, it is. You are able to buy it out. He still has a no movement, no trade clause, but nonetheless, I think this is still a player that Don Sweeney, if he's still general manager, which at this point all signs point to it as probably, he will sign a pretty decent extension after to end his career in Boston. And honestly, that's fine. I think he's a very good fit in Boston. I think Boston fits him well. And whenever he plays Minnesota, he's probably the best player on the ice for both teams. Whether they win or lose, Charlie Coyle has a B under his bonnet, as Jack Edwards would say. He looks good. Well, Charlie Coyle, he's a good dude. I think that's all I got. I think that's it. Yeah. I got nothing else. He's 31. He'll be 33, 34. His birthday's in March, so he'll be 32. Yeah, he'll be 34 when the contract expires. I could see him signing a 3 to 5 year contract. I don't know. Depends on the term. If it takes until he's 39, you're probably looking at like 5 to 5.5 million annual average value. If it takes him to 37, you're probably looking at like 6.5 million, knowing Don Sweeney. On the open market, I think it's more like he'll get maybe like a 4 to 4.5 million for 2 to 3 years, which would 3 years takes him to 37. With this Bruins team, though, if the Bruins start collapsing and losing games, and I'm just saying it right now, if that starts happening, I cannot fault Montgomery to this point. I think he's done an incredible job coaching. Don Sweeney may be out of a job. The making the playoffs and ticket sales are very important to the ownership group of the Bruins, and they will make a change to make a change. But making the playoffs, having the historic season last year has definitely bought Sweeney, the general manager of the Bruins, a little more time than I would personally like to see. Nonetheless, if this team collapses, and it collapses now, if they play 500 hockey for the rest of the year and they make a wild card spot, I think Sweeney is safe. I think if they continue to play 500 hockey next year, and it's getting near the trade deadline, and the Bruins are on the outside looking in, it could go either way. We could wait till after the trade deadline and maybe if the Bruins miss the playoffs, that's when we could see a change in the general manager role. I don't know. The issue I guess I have is Cam Neely, who is the president of Hockey Ops, and Don Sweeney have a very close relationship. They're very friendly. If you fire one, you're going to have to fire the other. Neely keeps Don Sweeney in that position regardless of the moves he makes, regardless of the performance, regardless of things like the Mitchell Miller signing, if you remember that. Just questionable calls sometimes. Neely always looks out for him, and which is nice. And I could do a whole video on Don Sweeney too and Cam Neely in terms of their management, but it's like the good old boys club in my opinion, and I think if you're going to fire one, you need to fire the other one. It just is what it is. We'll see. That's just long-term thinking. That's a lot of hypotheticals. If the Bruins start to collapse and implode, which stats would tell you a lot of the players on the Bruins are performing above where realistically they should be performing. That could be indicative of how well the coaching has been, how well the systems are put in place, how well the leadership is, both on and off the ice in the organization. But that could also just tell you that some of these players came in excited to be in Boston, excited for a chance to make the cup. Like James Van Riemsdyk came from Philadelphia. He hasn't been in the playoffs in quite some time. For example, Morgan Geekie was in the playoffs last year with Seattle. But just some examples, right? So we'll see if this is sustainable. If not, we could be reevaluating Charlie Coyle's extension in a couple of years when it expires. But all right, I'm getting off topic. I'm mixing up words right now. My mind's not making proper sentences. We're 35 minutes in. That's it. I appreciate you. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have questions. Let me know if you want me to dive into any of these further. I can look at other stats of Charlie Coyle. Yeah, I got a bruise. I don't know where that's from. But, you know, Charlie Coyle's a very interesting player. It's 35 minutes. What the hell? Changed the jerseys up there. We got the Capitals Screaming Eagle. We got the Blue Jackets Cannon. And we got the Joe Sakic Colorado Avalanche jersey. We'll probably stay up there for a bit when I decide to change them. I don't know. I don't know. It's just fun, though. I don't know. All right. Thank you, guys. Take care, right?